Most people spending money on homestead upgrades are solving problems that frontier builders already figured out 200 years ago. Not all of them. Some old methods were abandoned because they were genuinely dangerous, or slow, or only worked under very specific conditions. But a surprising number of them were dropped simply because cheap manufactured goods made it easier to buy a solution than to understand one. And right now, when everything costs more and supply chains are unreliable, the reasoning behind those old solutions starts looking a lot more attractive. Hit subscribe before we get into it, because this channel is about practical history, not survival fantasy. I'm Jerry Davis, and I want to be honest with you up front. Some of these tricks will save you real money. Some will save you real time. A few of them are worth copying almost exactly. Others need to be updated for modern safety codes, better materials, or different climate conditions. I'll tell you which is which. By the end, you'll have 25 actual ideas you can think about for your own place, not just a list of things mountain men did that sound interesting. Let's start with shelter placement, because that's where everything begins. Number 1. Frontier builders positioned their main structure with the longest solid wall facing the direction of the coldest prevailing wind. Not the view, not the road, the wind. On most North American homesteads, that meant a solid north or northwest wall with few or no windows. Modern builders spend enormous amounts of money on insulation and then punch large windows into the coldest side of a house because the view is nice. That single decision can significantly increase heating costs. The old approach was free. Just face the wall. Number 2. Roof overhangs were not decorative, they were calculated. A deeper overhang on the south side of a cabin blocked high summer sun from hitting the wall directly, while still allowing lower winter sun to warm the structure. Period builders did not have software. They used observation and experience. Modern energy auditors will tell you the same thing. A 2-foot overhang on a south-facing wall does meaningful work for free. Trim it down to save lumber costs, and you pay for it in cooling bills. Number 3. Small windows on the cold side, larger windows on the warmer side. Mountain builders understood that glass, even modern double-pane glass, loses heat faster than a well-built wall. They kept openings minimal where cold air pressed hardest, and used larger openings where winter sun could actually help. Some period structures had almost no north-facing windows at all. That sounds extreme, until your heating bill arrives. Number 4. Cross ventilation was built in deliberately. A window or opening on one wall and another on the opposite wall create airflow through a structure on warm days without any power. The trick is that they cannot be directly across from each other at the same height, or the air just travels in a straight line without actually cooling the interior. High openings on one side, lower on the other, pulls warm air up and out while drawing cooler air in at floor level. Stack ventilation. Some frontier builders used a high vent near the ridge of the roof specifically for this. Modern houses with forced air systems often eliminate this completely and then run air conditioning constantly. Number 5. Stone or packed earth floors were used partly because they were cheap and partly because they stay at a relatively stable temperature year-round. The ground several feet down is approximately 55 degrees Fahrenheit in much of North America, regardless of season. A dirt or stone floor connected to that thermal mass resists both summer heat and winter cold. The honest trade-off is moisture, sanitation, pest access, and air quality issues. A properly installed modern concrete or stone floor over appropriate vapor barrier captures most of the thermal benefit without those problems. The underlying principle is still sound. Number 6. Raised sleeping platforms. This one is simple and still works. Heat rises. Cold air settles at floor level. Sleeping on a raised platform, even just a foot or two above the ground, kept frontier travelers and homesteaders measurably warmer in cold structures. In a drafty cabin, the difference between sleeping on the floor and sleeping on a raised bunk was not trivial. This costs almost nothing to build. Number 7. Pine bough bedding. Historical accounts describe travelers and trailside camps using fresh pine or fir boughs layered under a bedroll for insulation from the cold ground. The branches trap air and compress slowly rather than immediately. This is not as effective as a modern foam sleeping pad, and it requires fresh boughs that you're cutting from living trees, which is an environmental consideration. But understanding why it worked, creating an insulating air gap between your body and cold ground, explains why a cheap foam pad does more for sleep temperature than an expensive sleeping bag with no pad underneath. Number 8. Wool. I'm going to be direct about this one because the synthetic industry has done a good job convincing people that wool is outdated. A wool shirt is heavier than a modern synthetic base layer, but it continues insulating when damp. It resists odor longer, it doesn't melt when a campfire throws sparks, and it is extraordinarily durable with basic care. Mountain men did not use wool because it was fashionable. They used it because it worked in conditions where wet and cold overlap constantly. Modern merino wool clothing is expensive. Thrift stores and surplus shops often have heavy wool items for very little money. Worth knowing. Number 9. Layering with a wind-blocking outer layer. Frontier travelers understood that a heavy insulating layer loses much of its value without something to stop wind from pulling heat out of it. A canvas outer garment was common. Canvas breathes, resists light rain, handles sparks reasonably well, and costs less to maintain than most technical fabrics. It is heavier, it absorbs moisture in sustained rain, but for work around a homestead or camp, it remains practical and inexpensive. Number 10. The spring house. If you have a natural spring or cold running water on your property, a properly built spring house can keep dairy products, produce, and beverages cooler than ambient air temperature without any electricity. The principle is that cold water moving through a stone or brick structure keeps the interior temperature near the water temperature, typically in the 40s or 50s, depending on your location and season. I want to be honest about the limitation here. Naturally cool water does not make food automatically safe by modern refrigeration standards. Spring house temperatures can vary, and harmful bacteria can still grow at spring house temperatures, given enough time. Frontier families had high rates of foodborne illness. This is a useful supplemental cooling method, not a replacement for a refrigerator when you have one available. Number 11. The root cellar. Properly built, a root cellar with good drainage, appropriate ventilation, and the right humidity can store root vegetables, apples, canned goods, and preserved products through winter without electricity. The key details that most people skip are the ventilation and drainage. A poorly drained root cellar becomes a wet hole. A poorly ventilated one fills with carbon dioxide from respiring produce and can be genuinely dangerous to enter. Historical construction manuals recommended 2 separate ventilation pipes, one to bring in cool outside air low and one to exhaust stale air high. That detail still matters. Number 12. The smokehouse, and the actual reason smoke preserved meat. Smoke alone does not make meat safe. This is worth repeating. The combination of salt concentration, controlled temperature, smoke's antimicrobial compounds, reduced moisture content, and storage conditions determines whether smoked meat is preserved or simply seasoned. Historical accounts of food poisoning from improperly cured meat are not rare. A functional smokehouse is still a genuinely useful structure for a homestead, but building one and using it correctly requires understanding the full process, not just the smoke part. Modern food safety resources should be consulted alongside historical methods. Number 13. Cold smoking versus hot smoking. Mountain men and homesteaders used both for different purposes. Cold smoking deposits antimicrobial compounds without significantly cooking the meat and relies on prior curing with salt to do most of the preservation work. Hot smoking cooks and partially dries the meat, but does not preserve it as long. The distinction matters enormously for food safety. Most modern instructions combine these terms loosely. If you're using historical smoking techniques for long-term preservation rather than flavor, the curing process before the smoke is the critical step. Number 14. Water collection and the cistern. Many frontier homesteads collected rainwater from roof lines into stone or brick cisterns for household use. In areas with unreliable water sources, this was not optional. Modern rainwater collection is regulated differently depending on state and county, and some jurisdictions have restrictions on collection amounts or require specific filtration for potable use. The underlying infrastructure idea, a properly covered cistern with a screened inlet and overflow drainage, is still practical for irrigation, livestock, and supplemental uses. The cost to collect and store rainwater is low compared to well drilling or extended droughts. Number 15. Gravity-fed water systems. If your water source is uphill from your structure, gravity will move it to you without a pump. Historical homesteads used wooden or clay pipe, stone channels, and hollow logs to carry water from springs or streams down to the cabin. Modern materials make this significantly more reliable and sanitary. Polyethylene tubing is inexpensive and durable. A gravity-fed system with adequate head pressure can supply reasonable flow rates for household use at zero operating cost. The investment is in the initial pipe run. The operating cost is nothing. Number 16. The orientation of outbuildings relative to the main structure for wind and drainage. Mountain builders placed barns, smokehouses, and outhouses with specific relationships to the main cabin. The outhouse downhill and downwind. The barn close enough to reduce winter exposure, but positioned so prevailing winds did not blow directly from barn to cabin. These decisions cost nothing and prevented both odor problems and the spread of disease. On modern rural properties, the same principles still apply and are sometimes ignored entirely. Number 17. Low-tech rodent protection for stored food. Hanging supplies from rafters on smooth metal or glass-covered poles. Storing grain and flour in sealed ceramic, glass, or metal containers rather than sacks. Keeping a working cat. Placing fresh-cut mint, pennyroyal, or other strongly aromatic plants near storage areas. None of these are magical solutions, but period households understood that rodents are relentless, and passive deterrence reduce losses without requiring constant active intervention. A tight metal container costs money once. Replacing flour contaminated by mice costs money repeatedly. Number 18. The significance of wood species in construction and firewood. Frontier builders chose log species based on workability, shrinkage, rot resistance, and availability. White oak and chestnut were preferred for foundation logs because of natural rot resistance. Pine split well for shingles. Hardwoods provided longer burning firewood with higher BTU output. The practical lesson today is that not all firewood is equal, and burning green or high moisture wood reduces heat output significantly while increasing creosote buildup in chimneys. Well-seasoned hardwood, stored off the ground with good air circulation, remains the cheapest efficient fuel if you have access to it. Number 19. Wood storage and the drying process. Historical accounts consistently emphasize that firewood needed to season before burning. A full year of drying was common, covered on top but open on the sides to allow airflow. Split wood dries faster than rounds. Small diameter pieces dry faster than large. Storing wood directly on the ground promotes rot and insect infiltration. Elevated on rails or pallets with a roof overhang above costs almost nothing to build and meaningfully extends the quality of stored wood. Number 20. Hand tools and the advantage of sharpness. Historical builders and trappers kept their tools razor sharp, not because they were obsessive, but because a sharp tool requires less force and produces less dangerous, unpredictable movement than a dull one. A dull axe bounces. A dull draw knife tears. A dull knife requires pressure that causes slipping. Learning to sharpen a few hand tools properly is a skill that saves money on replacement tools and reduces injury risk. It requires only a decent sharpening stone and practice. Number 21. Lime wash as a surface treatment. Interior and exterior surfaces of historical cabins and outbuildings were frequently coated with lime wash, a mixture of hydrated lime and water. It brightened dark interiors, inhibited mold and insects, filled small cracks in chinking and plaster, and acted as a mild disinfectant. It is still inexpensive, available through agricultural suppliers, and appropriate for many rural outbuilding surfaces where appearance matters less than function. It will not substitute for modern exterior paint on frame construction, but on masonry, log, or clay surfaces, it performs historically well. Number 22. Chinking and the importance of flexibility. The material between logs in a historical cabin was not just decoration, it was the primary air and moisture barrier of the wall assembly. Historical chinking used combinations of clay, moss, horsehair, lime, sawdust, straw, and sand, chosen because they could move slightly with the logs as they shrank, swelled, and settled seasonally. Hard, rigid mortars cracked and fell out. Modern log cabin chinking products are specifically designed with this flexibility in mind. The principle is the same as what period builders understood. The material has to move with the structure or it fails. Number 23. Thermal mass inside a structure. Frontier builders, who could get stone-built fireplaces and hearths that absorbed heat during burning and released it slowly after the fire died down. A stone hearth holding heat at 2 in the morning is meaningfully different from a space that went cold the moment the fire went out. The principle behind masonry heaters and rocket mass heaters used today is identical. A large thermal mass surrounding the combustion area absorbs and slowly radiates heat. This is not magic, it is physics. And it was understood practically long before it was understood scientifically. Number 24. The kitchen garden layout for reduced labor. Historical kitchen gardens were placed as close to the main structure as practical, on the side receiving the most sunlight, and oriented so that plants requiring the most attention were nearest the path. Frontier families were not lazy. They were economical with motion. Designing a garden so that the most frequently visited plants are nearest the work area and the least demanding ones farthest out reduces daily walking and time spent in the garden. That sounds trivial until you're maintaining a substantial garden while doing everything else a homestead requires. Number 25. Knowing when the old method is simply not worth it. This one matters, and most channels will not say it. Some frontier techniques were used because there was no alternative. Low doorways were not clever heat management, they were often structural limitations or defensive necessity. Dirt floors were cheap, but they contributed to respiratory illness, parasitic infection, and sanitation problems that shortened lives. Smoking meat without proper salt curing created foodborne illness. Collecting water from streams without treatment caused typhoid and dysentery. The romantic version of frontier life leaves most of this out. The actual lesson of frontier homesteading is not that old methods are inherently superior. It is that the people who used them understood function, worked with available materials, built for their specific climate and site conditions, and maintained what they had. Those habits are what saved money and kept people alive. You can apply those habits using modern materials, modern safety knowledge, and modern tools, and come out ahead of both the frontier settler and the modern consumer who just buys whatever the advertisement recommends. That's 25. If you found this useful, subscribe for more practical frontier history without the mythology. And let me know in the comments which one you're actually planning to use. I'm curious what people are actually working on out there.